Okay, here is the video lecture on gender roles, as this is going to relate to your class, Bridgemont Community and Technical College. Gender is something else, and those of you who had me for psychology last semester, my apologies. A little bit of this might be review from last semester in Intro to Psychology, but that's okay. A little review never hurts. The impact of gender and gender roles cannot be ignored in terms of how they impact human development. We're going to talk about gender specifically. Now, the idea of gender and the idea of sex, these are two different things. We'll start with sex. Sex is biological. Most of us are born either being biologically male or being biologically female. Gender, on the other hand, is a social or a cultural construction. Okay, a lot of people confuse sex and gender, or they think they're the same things, but they're really completely different. Gender is the social construction involving how roles are assigned to being male or female. And every society does this a little bit differently. We have very specific ways we define what it means to be a male or what it means to be a female. A different society or a different culture in a different part of the world would define those gender roles differently. It would mean something a little different to be a man or something a little different to be a woman. And we'll talk about that. Notions of what is gender appropriate will vary from place to place. In class, I always ask, especially the ladies, especially some of my older female students who have children, and of course the guys too who have daughters, what they think about this. But ladies specifically, how many of you would feel this would be an appropriate role for women within our society? I had a student who was in the service, and he had traveled to Amsterdam, and had mentioned the fact that prostitution was legal in Amsterdam, and there was a specific district in Amsterdam where people would literally walk by buildings and would window shop, like you would window shop for a purse or a pair of shoes or something that you're interested in buying. Same thing with women. Guys could walk by and pretty much pick out the one they want, and they could, purchase whatever service they want to purchase if you catch the drift there. Supposedly, this is the statue that symbolizes that you're in the red light district of Amsterdam. And he actually stated, the student that had actually stated that they would issue you a receipt after you purchased your, whatever it is you purchased from this prostitute. You would get a receipt. So that seems offensive, and it seems inappropriate as a role for a woman, specifically in our society. Most people have problems with the idea of their wives or their daughters or their girlfriends doing this for a living, because it's, we're socialized that this is not appropriate for the most part in our culture. Now we have instrumental traits or roles. These are traits associated with being male. They describe individuals who act on the world and influence it. People who are independent. They make things happen. They make things change. They're in charge. Those are typically characteristics associated with being men or being a man. Expressive traits or roles are traits associated with females. They describe emotional functioning and individuals who value interpersonal relationships. And again, these are characteristics we typically associate with being female. And if you need to pause this in places to take notes and to write this stuff down, that's certainly, you can certainly do that here. So, gender stereotypes. Broad categories that reflect our impressions and beliefs about males and females. We'll talk more about gender stereotypes here shortly. And this definitely influences significantly, maybe just as much as the media, how we develop as human beings. All gender stereotypes refer to an image of what the typical member of a particular social category is like. Children understand gender stereotypes by the time they enter kindergarten. So this idea of gender socialization is so powerful that by the time kids enter kindergarten, they already have a basic understanding of what our society teaches us about being male or female. And to veer outside of those lines or outside of those boundaries can bring some severe consequences. The little boy who acts effeminate or the little girl who acts masculine, certainly it can bring some problems for those children, as we'll talk about. Gender stratification. This is the unequal distribution of wealth, power, and privilege between men and women. Virtually every society in the history of the world has assigned more status to men than to women. Men have had more power, they've had more wealth, they've had more privilege. And I've talked about it at least a dozen times in this class, but the best example right off the bat of gender stratification is the earnings differential. Women make 81 cents for every male dollar for doing exactly the same job. So that's an example of gender stratification. We could also talk about the presidency, the history of the U.S. presidency. We've never had a female president. The most powerful position, supposedly, in our country has been largely males. Well, exclusively males, I should say. Men and women are treated differently based upon their gender or sex. A story that I always tell, and I think I did tell this to you guys who were in my intro to psych last semester, but I'll abbreviate the story, but it's really true. I mean, women and men are treated very differently in the same situation, the same social situation. And a lot of this has to do with how we're socialized to be men and women. If a woman walks in, this is a true story that I witnessed. I saw a woman walk into a bar full of men. She sat at the bar, literally just kind of put her hand on the side of her face, kind of leaned over like she was tired, just wanted a drink. And there were probably 3 or 4 guys who systematically, one at a time, walked over to her and tried to hit on her, delivering horrific pickup lines that I'm not going to repeat on this video, just terrible things. One of them that I can repeat, one guy asked this girl if her feet were tired because she had been running through his mind all day, to which she replied, "That's impossible, I've never met you, how can I be running through your mind?" So she was obviously getting fed up. And the last guy who approached her after she shot him down asked her this question. He asked her, "Well, if you don't want to hook up, if you don't want to go home with one of us, then why are you here? Why would you even come to a bar?" So the idea is that a woman who is fairly attractive can't walk into a bar without the expectation that she's trying to hook up or trying to seek extracurricular activities, if you will. If a guy walks into a bar and sits down, are 1,000 girls going to hit on him? Is he going to be treated differently than the girl was treated? Definitely so. He's probably not going to be subjected to these horrific pickup lines, and the assumption is not going to be that he's there in a position of submission, much like the woman was perceived to be. So, now gender roles. These are attitudes and activities that a society links to each sex. And again, every society does this differently, and we're going to talk about that here. Stereotypical male gender role. Stereotypically, males are supposed to be powerful. They're supposed to be strong. They're supposed to be in charge. And you can see with these images here, they're warlike. They're gladiators. They're in control. They're unemotional. This whole idea of masculinity. So again, if guys aren't strong, if they're not macho, if they're not physically intimidating, if they're not dominant, then there's supposedly something wrong. I mean, we judge them negatively. Women and men alike, we judge our men sort of negatively if they don't kind of fit into this neat and nice box. And the same for girls. The whole idea of femininity. And we could go back to the 1950s, the idea of the woman here, in the skirt, or rather the dress, in the apron, in the kitchen, baking, as this is supposed to be her appropriate role. What happens when women step outside of their stereotypically feminine, roles? In our culture, women stereotypically are supposed to be weak, or weaker than men anyway. Nurturing, dependent, caregiving, raising children, domestic. And if women are not these things, then we think something is wrong with them. Is there any truth to these gender stereotypes? Perhaps. Physical development. As infants, boys are more active than girls, and this difference increases during childhood. So is this biological? Or are boys just taught from an early age that they're supposed to be aggressive, they're supposed to be rough and tumble, and that's why they are? So we could go back and forth with genetics versus environment, or heredity versus nature, however you would want to say that. Girls tend to be healthier than boys. Female embryos are more likely than males to survive prenatal development. Infant boys are more prone to diseases and dysfunctions. Adolescent boys and young men are more likely to engage in unhealthy, risk-taking behaviors. Again, are these biologically endowed traits, especially the adolescent boys and the risk-taking? Boys are more risk-taking. They like to be more inappropriate and engage in more inappropriate behaviors. Is this biology, or is it just that boys are sort of encouraged more or taught to be this way? In a classroom, boys are more likely than girls to have a hard time sitting still. On a playground, boys more often play vigorously and girls often play more quietly and are more demure. So again, is this something that's just taught, socialized, or is it perhaps biological? Intellectual ability. Females tend to have a greater verbal ability than males. Are females just biologically endowed with greater verbal abilities, or is this type of intelligence more emphasized with girls? Hard to say. The research kind of can go back and forth with that. Girls can read, write, and spell better than boys. More boys have reading and other language-related problems such as stuttering. Males tend to have greater spatial ability than females. From childhood on, boys tend to have better mental rotation skills. They can visualize things in their minds and manipulate movements in their minds better than girls. From adolescence on, boys are more accurate than girls on spatial tasks that involve relations between objects in space. And the last thing I want to talk about on this half, or this part of the video lecture, is gender socialization. This is the process where we learn the behaviors and the attitudes that are expected of our gender. Again, within our society, we are taught, I'm going to go back here, well, we've already seen this, the idea of men being masculine. We're taught right off the bat as men, that we play with certain toys. And parents immediately gravitate their children, their young boys, toward, baseballs and basketballs and trucks, and we still do that. Nurseries, by and large, for young boys are dark masculine colors like blue and green, for example. We discourage, as parents, our children when they want to play with toys that are gender inappropriate. The young boy who wants to play dress up, that's discouraged immediately because there's this fear that he's going to be gay, or there's this fear that something's going to happen. Same with girls. We, as parents in this society, we start discouraging girls if they are, in charge, if they're domineering, if they want to play with Tonka trucks, or if they want to wear camouflage. We start thinking, oh gosh, something's wrong. She's going to be gay or a lesbian. And as parents, we worry about that, and we try to steer them into the gender appropriate activities and toys. So we start teaching children right out of the gate and setting them on this path of development that's going to help them fit and mold into what society has set forth as the example of what's gender appropriate. And I'm going to call that the end of this part. Thanks.